Hello humans! Today I want to talk about this guy right here. This is a crkt that I picked up on a recent trip to House of Knives. This is the Orca in black. I don't think, to my knowledge, they don't make any other colors of the Orca. I doubt they will, but it would be really cool to get like a dark ocean blue. Recyclable, right on the box. I actually really like that. And our goddamn Proposition 65 warning. So dumb. But I do like a recyclable container. I do like the container I can actually burn. That is quite nice. Inside we have the knife, we have a little piece of paper about assisted opening, and then, again, literally just a cardboard box. Burn it, recycle it, do whatever you do with cardboard, but that I really like. Alright, assisted opening. This actually doesn't. But initiate the deployment, and partway through the rotation, the blade swings open at impressive speed for a simple, powerful, one-handed opening that doesn't tell you anything. You can go to their website to get more information, but like, or if you can look at this picture and just immediately understand, which, I mean, you kind of can. You get the picture of the spring and you can understand how that might affect it, but like, this doesn't provide any information. It also doesn't give you any safety warning about it, because like, assisted opening is super cool. It has a very different feel to it. If you're looking at a knife from the perspective of somebody who needs a tool, assisted opening can sometimes make sense. It does have its drawbacks. I'm not denying that. And personally, as somebody who likes to fidget with his knives, those drawbacks feel fairly substantial. But this isn't enough to tell me what an assisted opening is, and it doesn't tell me enough to be like, hey, hold your knife more securely than you think you need to, right? It's not quite an automatic levels of power, but there still is a little bit of oomph there. So I would, if you're gonna give me a warning about assisted opening blades, give me a better one than that. All right, I actually really like these. I have a little bit of a collection of them. Not much changes for the first little bit, but much like a Saturday morning cartoon, you get a fun little I have this one already. Ooh, I don't know what models have, if it's model based or if it's just randomly you get assigned one of however many, but I'm pretty sure I already have this one here. Yeah, but they're fun little comics. They're like the ones you get in the 10-cent pieces of gum or the Sunday comic or the Sunday newspaper, right? Like, I kind of dig it. Tell your boss you have a family emergency, fake an illness, cut a hole in the ceiling and climb out. It's how to avoid getting asked to work the weekend. And then you have like tips for carrying, tips for maintaining and caring for your knife, and your lifetime warranty detailings. Fair enough. I already have this one, so I'm not going to keep it, but I do normally keep them. And then here we have, inside of its perfect little dog. I feel dog poo bags are normally narrow and long. This one here is wide and wide. It's a square. Different breed of dog poo bag. I kind of dig it. All right, and then here we have the Orca. Okay, so before I pop it open, it does look a little bit like an Orca, which I think is kind of cool. Me and my girlfriend have a small collection of knives that look like animals, and this one here I mostly got to add to that collection because I think it is fairly neat. We have a big lanyard hole right back there. We have a black pivot collar with black G10 handles, which is kind of neat. We have, one screw holding the pocket clip in place, but it is a recessed pocket clip, so it shouldn't move too much. Never mind. Wow, look at that. That's why you want two screws. It might be better once I tighten it down. We'll find out. That's a lot of play, though, in the pocket clip. Yikes. And then we have this G10, I think. Yeah, G10 backspacer. And a top flipper. So, that absolutely rockets open. That is an assisted action working as designed. Okay, this is a weird little guy. Open, it also looks like some type of an animal, in my opinion, but this is like a 2.5 finger grip. Like, this is a small boy. Immediate impressions, it's actually more comfortable than I kind of expected. Oh god, that's uncomfortable. In this one grip, it is actually a lot more comfortable than I would have expected it to be, quite frankly. It's got a very wide feel to it, so it actually feels a lot more secure than a two-fingered grip has any right to feel, which is kind of cool. Short little drop point blade. Ooh, a little wonkiness on that grind. You can actually see the grind gets wider in some spots and more narrow towards the heel. That's kind of interesting. We have pretty well full height. Is that going to be a hollow grind, or is that going to be... What the... It looks like it's ever so slightly hollow, but to be honest, it could be considered flat. Like it's right on that line. I'm not feeling anything in particular. The only other thing that I have noticed immediately is that this pocket clip is bad. It's weird. Oh, that's why. Okay. So this little piece of the liner isn't actually attached to the part of the liner lock that moves. So the only way to access the liner lock is in this upper section right before the blade. Which, I mean, the blade has a generously sized choil, but I could absolutely see, like you can see right there, right? You are at small but existent risk of nicking yourself on that. And then you can get down to right about there, and then the spring starts to take over. Yeah, detents in. It is centered out the box, which is nice. The action is very, very snappy, even with, well, it feels... I just poked myself. Do have to be a little bit careful with opening this. I was holding this over here, and I went to open it, and the blade was actually in such a position it didn't draw blood, but I did manage to poke myself, which is interesting. I think that the way to open this is less like a top flip and more of like a reach over flip. Anyway, this one position, shockingly comfortable for tearing down packages or cardboard or whatever. That'd be pretty good. All right. Time to test out our edge. Yeah, definitely sharp. I'm seeing some, but not too much rolling. Absolutely inadequate performance. Now we're going to check the thumbnail. Yeah, so right there where it goes from being a very, very narrow grind to being a slightly taller grind, there's just a little bit of wonkiness with that blade. There. So I'm assuming that has something to do with whatever procedure they're using to sharpen it. I am not going to claim to know what that is, but whatever it is leading to a little bit of that imperfection where the angle shifts. It's probably like a pull-through grinding wheels for the final edge. It's two counter-rotating wheels, and then the blade gets pulled between the two of them. And then whatever machine is doing the pulling isn't twisting at the correct time for such a short blade and is leading to that little bit of wonkiness right there. It's not quite a miss section, you can feel where the difference is if you're trying. So this is going to prove to be fairly interesting. Let's do a rubber cut. One position that is super comfortable. Oh. Okay. I'll do that again. It's kind of hard to hold it in such a way where your thumb, like your hand isn't getting in the way of your cut. But if you can get like a more downwards cut, that's actually pretty good. And I wasn't noticing any like significant shouldering or anything along those lines. Yeah, that's okay. Okay. Color me impressed. Color me impressed. I was not expecting that. Put our little pieces in the dog poo bag right there. And then finally, our poking test. This is not a knife that I would consider to be a good self-defense tool. It's quite small in size, and the fact that you only really get one grip is fairly limiting in your martial arts options with it. But nonetheless, it is absolutely sinking into that foam. Yeah, this is taking very minimal force, and especially because this is a really strong stabbing grip to begin with. Like, just sinking it right in there is taking next to nothing. It's pretty impressive. Very, very pokey. Fairly pokey, fairly slicey. I wouldn't necessarily want to throw it at bigger tasks. Like I said, just the only real way of holding this put my thumb in the path of the cut, which kind of sucked and would suck if I was processing a lot of cardboard. But you know what? I am excited and fairly interested in seeing how this guy performs over the next little bit. I'm going to have to tighten down that pocket clip, though. Yeah, that's the other thing. For two-finger grip, I don't notice that pocket clip at all. It's pretty good. For such a small knife, I'm fairly impressed by that. Yeah, so I'm going to play with this guy for a little bit on and off, of course, and I will give you some thoughts now. And we are back. So I've been playing with this guy for a couple of weeks now, on and off, and honestly, I'm actually a little bit impressed by it. So I'm going to start off with what I found out. D2 blade steel, which I was not expecting. It didn't take any type of a patina or anything like that during the time that I used it. The edge held up very well, including, standard affair. Lots of cardboard, some wood, odds and ends like that. It handled all of that brilliantly, which surprised me a little bit. It's also a little bit weird to me that a blade this short and it doesn't... Okay. The big advantage of D2 steel is a relatively high toughness for a large amount of edge retention. Edge retention makes sense across any blade shape. The toughness in a blade this small and a knife overall this small is very curious to me because you're not that capable of putting a lot of force into the blade. It's very unlikely that you're going to need that extra toughness. The trade-off for getting a lot of edge retention for a fairly inexpensive price is pretty good, so it's not worth complaining about that much. And, I mean, it is still relatively stain resistant. It's not stainless. That's the big drawback of D2, but it is fairly stain resistant. And I'm never going to complain about extra toughness. It's just interesting to me that it would be worth it. And kind of cements the idea that this is supposed to be like a self-defense option. And for that, it's not poor. Assisted action. Very, this is going to hold your hand exactly here. This isn't a bad grip by any means. This is a grip that I'm quite used to using for training and stuff like that. It puts the belly and the point in very accessible areas. The blade is fairly short for self-defense situation, but if you're limited by blade length because of where you live or just a personal preference for a smaller knife, I can understand that. Despite being pretty, you have this grip, this is your only grip, it's very restrictive in the way that you hold it. I found that for a variety of hand sizes, from my sister who has quite small hands, all the way up to my grandfather who has hands significantly larger than mine, this is relatively comfortable. Basically, as long as either the second or first bone of your two index fingers fits into this shape, it's going to be pretty good. The jimping is exactly where you want it to be. It does really well through draw cuts, and it is very easy to use the point. So for those reasons, it is quite nice. There's obviously the aesthetic flair of looking like an orca. That's going to be take it or leave it, but I personally think it does look quite a bit like an orca, and I am quite fond of that, which is a big plus. The other thing about its construction that I found a little bit bizarre, other than the D2 blade steel, which I'm not upset about, it's just not what I expected. This isn't G10, and you can kind of get that feel by looking at it, and definitely a little bit by feeling it, but I wasn't expecting it to be glass reinforced nylon. This is something you typically see on very inexpensive knives. Seeing it in the $100 price point, 100 Canadian dollar price point, so in and around 70 US bucks, and then adjust for increase in taxes and buying at a retailer. So, you know, take the 100 with a grain of salt, but that is roughly what I paid for it. It's interesting, but it's not necessarily the end of the world, and it does have enough, like, there's enough texturing on it that it is fairly comfortable. I would have liked something a little bit better, like, honestly, a black, my Carta would have been really, really nice, but even a black G10 would have been a little bit nicer than this, so I'm not, it would have been nice to see something more than glass reinforced nylon, but it is decidedly not the end of the world. This thing's biggest drawback as a self-defense knife, and I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, my apologies, is the fact that in order to open it, you can kind of cat's claw it and use your thumb, but no matter how you want to play with this, you're going to be doing a fairly large amount of adjusting to get your hands into a quote-unquote usable position, right? No matter how you're going to end up doing it, you're doing more adjusting than you, in my opinion, should be doing. Compare that to a thumb stud knife, flick, and you're there pretty much. This is also a stance that I've used quite a bit, but even if I want to go into the same or similar style as the Orca, it is roll my fingers, and that's it. For thumb studs and for a flipper tab, it is a little bit more, admittedly, but it's really not that bad. Flick. Whereas with the Orca, you have to flick and then twist the whole knife a fairly large amount, which is a little bit slower. For a self-defense knife, that could absolutely be an impacting factor, but that's going to come down to personal preference, and quite frankly, this knife is too small for me personally to consider it as a self-defense knife, despite the traits that it has that would make it a fairly positive self-defense knife if you are used to blades of this size and shape. That's the important part, right? Like I said, very comfortable in this one particular grip, very uncomfortable in pretty much any other grip. It's just made of hot spots. The fact that the pocket clip only has one screw is a little bit negative. I've tightened it down as much as I can, and it does still move around a fair amount. It is sunk, so it might just be a QC issue. And again, having a harder scale material would have helped with this, because you wouldn't get a pocket clip that's capable of sort of grooving in as much, and you'd have a more resistant, abrasive resistant material for your scales. So over time, this is just going to move side to side. I've tightened it down as much as I can. There's not much else I can do about it, but there you go. It does have a lanyard hole, which is, again, like, that's going to come down to personal opinion, whether you like that or not. On a blade this size, a lanyard hole could definitely be positive, but because of the shape of the actual handle, keep going off, but because of the shape of the actual handle, it's a little bit awkwardly placed in order to grab it to increase your grip, which is usually what I like to do with a smaller knife. So not for me personally, but I can absolutely understand the appeal for somebody else. And if you take the pocket clip off and you just have it hanging loose in your pocket, a lanyard is really nice because you can drape the lanyard over, the edge of your pocket, make it easier to grab. I can absolutely see the benefit of that as well. Or even just decorating it. I mean, this is pretty nice to decorate. Overall, actions remained very, very consistent. Access to the lock bar kind of sucks, just because it's a little bit awkward with the way that this short sort of, I don't know, crescent is. That it's not a bump. What do I call that? A peak. I'm going to call that a peak. Because of the way that the peak is placed, you have to reach over it with your thumb in order to close it. Or, and I don't fathom how somebody did this, but my sister ended up deciding that the way to do this was to reach over with your index finger and do it that way. That's very bizarre to me, but it did work. I personally just sort of reach over with my thumb, use the tip of my thumb. It is a little bit less comfortable, but it's really not that bad. And because of the assisted action, and crkt has a phenomenal assisted action to begin with, flicking it is very satisfying. It makes a very heavy thunk. So, you know, that's nice. I quite like it. That's not true. I very rarely felt like I wanted more of an edge than I had. The only times I did is when I took this thing out for any type of woodworking. Having as much belly as it does definitely makes the blade feel longer than it actually is, and having such good access to the tip means that opening packages, feed bags, stuff like that was absolutely no problem for me. So on balance, if you are looking at a smaller knife, whether that be for legal restrictions or just because you prefer small knives, this is a good option. And if you are somebody with bigger, higher than average hands or big hands, having something like this is pretty good option, quite frankly, because for a small knife, it's quite comfortable all the way up to the size of absolute catcher's mitts. Like, my grandpa genuinely has huge hands, and he found this thing pretty comfortable to hold. A little bit more difficult to manipulate with massive hands, but that's the trade-off that you're going to be going for, right? With a small knife, no matter what small knife it happens to be. So if you are in the market for a small knife, I do absolutely believe that this thing is fairly recommendable. It is quite dependable. D2 is a great steel, fairly easy to sharpen, but you are getting a lot of edge retention, with the drawback being less stainlessness, which is going to matter more or less to you depending on what your lifestyle is like. On balance, I do absolutely think that this is a good use of 100 Canadian dollars, slightly under, but 100 Canadian dollars. And aesthetically, I think it's really cool. So yeah, that's kind of all I have to say about the little guy. The only real modification I would make is give me something a little bit tougher, like harder, for the handle scales so that this pocket clip stops moving around. And I'm a happy, happy man. Yeah, so real quick, I'm just going to do some size comparisons. Here it is next to the Wii Banter, and as you can see, it is quite a bit smaller than the Wii Banter, and the Civivi Chevalier, quite a bit smaller than either one, but also quite a bit, like, the actual height of the blade is very, very similar, if it's slightly larger than the Wii Banter, and the height of the handle is bigger than either, which makes this a lot more hand-filling than it would otherwise look. And then here we have my Buck 110. And as you can see, it is absolutely tiny compared to the Buck 110. Open, this thing is roughly the same length as the Buck 110's handle only. So it is absolutely a fairly small knife. And my regular Zippo is in the other room. So here it is next to a Zippo. As you can see, the actual body of this thing is only slightly longer than the actual Zippo. And in terms of height, it is very close to the same height as the Zippo. In terms of thickness, as you can see, it is, you know, over 3/4 the thickness of the Buck 110. And I think a lot of that added thickness is just to accommodate the assisted opening action. And thickness next to the Zippo. It is pretty much, it actually might be the exact same thickness as the Zippo. So pluses and minuses. Overall, like I said, I do think this is a very recommendable knife. It is quite comfortable in the hand. And if you are looking for a small knife, I would absolutely say go out and pick this guy up. Stay safe and have fun out there. Peace.